Crime lies and what states can do to counter the deep state. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt. I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. Go back in time just a couple months, a few months, even a few weeks, when crime was on the minds of American citizens. Concerns over rising crime in America due largely because of Joe Biden's open border policies and failures to crack down on illegals who were coming into America, not as Democrats would have it believed, to make money for economic opportunity, to get jobs and send money homes to their families and better themselves, but rather to outright commit crimes and to take advantage of the many cushy entitlements that the Joe Biden administration gave these illegals. Remember, putting them up in schools in New York City, busing them around, using tax dollars to put them up in hotels, give them food, medical treatment, so forth, so on, and so forth, and so on. So go back in time and remember how crime was one of the major issues of concern to American citizens as they headed into election time, election day, headed into the ballot boxes, and thankfully to cast votes for Donald Trump. So all this crime nonsense will soon come to an end. But go back in time and remember the sense of the American people and how concerned we are and how Joe Biden and his friends in the media, based on FBI deep state statistics that we later learned, came out and said, you know what? Crime is actually down under Joe Biden, not up. Well, fast forward a few weeks from those statements, and we found out that, guess what? The FBI was putting out false statistics, misleading statistics. Why? It's anybody's guess, but I'm going to go ahead and say it was the deep state trying to protect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as Kamala raced against the clock to beat Donald Trump for president and to ding Donald Trump's narrative about the rising crime in America. Before we get into more of that, I want to quickly mention, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at Real Life Network, at washingtontimes.com, and of course, wherever podcasts are available. And if you do go to Washington Times to get Bold and Blunt, make sure you subscribe, right? Just go to the bottom of the page, click on the newsletter section, and find Bold and Blunt with Cheryl Chumley. That's my newsletter. In it, you'll get the commentaries that I write at the Washington Times, as well as my twice weekly Tuesday and Thursday Bold and Blunt podcasts. If you don't want to go through all that, or you just want to test out Bold and Blunt before subscribing, certainly you can just do a Google search on Bold and Blunt, and you can listen in wherever podcasts are available. I want to read from this piece that was printed, published, posted in the Telegraph back in October of 2024, just a couple months, just a few weeks after the FBI was putting out stats saying that crime, particularly violent crime, was down under Joe Biden. And Americans all had Joe Biden to thank for the reduced crimes being committed in their communities, and any crimes that they happen to see, well, you know what, go back and take a second look, because maybe it wasn't crime after all, right? Maybe it was just I don't know, drinking too much that day. You had too much coffee, you had not enough coffee, whatever it was. Nothing to see here insofar as crime in your communities. Go home, folks. So let me read this from the Telegraph. October 2024, shortly after the FBI and Joe Biden and the media, the Joe Biden butt-kissing media, were all reporting that crime was down under Joe Biden. This headline, violent crime went up, not down under Biden, revised FBI numbers show. Isn't that interesting, right? So you can put out whatever stats you want and then make the headlines, make the narratives as you wish, and then just wait a little while, revise the numbers, and come out and say, oops, sorry, now we have the new fresh numbers. But by then the media has really moved on, and they've already reported all they want to on that particular topic, particularly if it favors a Democrat, and they certainly don't want want to go back and correct those numbers, those statistics, particularly if it were to put a Democrat in a bad light. Agency, this is reading again from the Telegraph's piece, the second headline. Agency, meaning the FBI, faces questions over why it seemingly underreported rapes and murders under President's watch, President Joe Biden's watch, that is. Isn't that interesting, right? Because you can't have rapes and murders under a Democrat president when there is a White House up for grabs and the Democrat pick is falling in polls to the Republican pick, particularly Donald Trump. Violent crime increased under Joe Biden, reading from this Telegraph piece, rather than decreasing as previously thought. Well, it was previously thought because that's what the FBI previously reported. Revised figures from the FBI show thousands, the Telegraph reports, more murders, rapes, robberies, and aggravated assaults occurred in 2022 than the Bureau had initially recorded, as first identified by Real Clear Investigations. A great website, Real Clear Politics, Real Clear Investigations. Go there and check out their work. Anyhow, reading on from the Telegraph, when it published the figures last year, the FBI reported that America's violent crime rate fell by 1.7%. But it has since revised those figures to show it actually increased by, drum roll please, 4.9%. Wow, that's a heck of a skewed statistic right there. Reading on. Some 223,511 robberies took place over the course of 2022, more than 3,000 more than had previously been reported. Reading on. Rapes were understated by more than 7,000 cases. 7,000 victims of rape just fell by the wayside in the FBI's accounting. Isn't that interesting? Reading on. Some 21,781 murders took place rather than 21,156. And 909,929 aggravated assaults occurred instead of 893,980. Isn't that interesting? The rapes, though, 7,000. That's amazing. The Bureau, reading on, did not make any reference to the revised figure in a press release on the crime statistics for 2023, which it published in September. Yes, nothing to see here, folks. Go home. That's what tells me this is more a deep state strategy, or it was a deep state strategy, much more than just an oops, oversight, honest mistake. Because the FBI would have copped up to it, right? They would have had an explanation. They would have had some sort of transparent reason, justification, cause for the underreporting. But the fact was, they just slid the new numbers in, slid the revised numbers in, the truthful numbers that countered the narrative that the Democrats wanted to put out about a decrease in crime under Biden. They just slid the revised truthful figures in there without nary an explanation. Don't take my word from it. Here's what the Telegraph reported on it. It's not clear why the statistics were initially lower. That's because the FBI didn't say anything about it. Reading from Telegraph still. This is very interesting, very important article. Polling consistently shows that crime ranks as one of the top priorities for voters ahead of the presidential election in November. You can put past tense on that because we already know that polling showed that crime was indeed one of the top concerns for voters headed into November, and that Donald Trump was the candidate who was picking up on those concerns and making a key issue, a key platform, a key political promise going forward. Kamala Harris, meanwhile, border czar, remember her? The failed border czar, forgot to go to the border and check on the border, even though she was the border czar. But Kamala Harris, meanwhile, was late to the game talking about crime and communities, concerns about crimes and all that. And she only did so when polling started showing her falling miserably to Donald Trump. Donald Trump, the Republican candidate, reading from Telegraph again, was pressed on his claims about rising crime during the presidential debate in September. Remember this? This is what he said then. All over the world, crime is down, all over the world except here, Trump said, who was repeatedly interrupted by moderators throughout the debate. Remember that? Trump went on and said, crime here, meaning in America, is up and through the roof. Get this. He was told by David Muir, M-U-I-R, I forget how to pronounce it, the ABC News host, quote, get this, as you know, the FBI says overall violent crime is coming down in this country, end quote. Trump fired back by accusing the FBI of issuing, quote, defrauding statements, end quote. And then Trump also claimed the Bureau had avoided counting, quote, the worst cities, end quote. There you have it, right? Definitely deep state politicking, deep state strategizing at the time, all aimed to counter Donald Trump's narrative, truthful narrative about the rising violent crimes in America under Joe Biden, due in large part, or linked in large part, to the open border policies under Joe Biden. The deep state outed, finally, when it had to revise its statistics, and at least the Telegraph reported on them. But the thing is, if we continue to rely on the feds to ensure the safety of American citizens, that may work well for us in the next 4 years after January 20th and Donald Trump is inaugurated. But what happens when the next president comes in, who's a Democrat, who turns around and undoes all that Donald Trump does in terms of securing the border? And there we are, back to square one under Joe Biden again, back to open borders, ushering in all the illegals with intent to commit crimes in America. And our communities once again are facing drastic hikes in violent crimes, only to be told by the deep staters under the Democrat executive in the White House that, hey, crime is actually going down. Violent crime is actually going down. And certainly, most certainly of all, rapes are going down. What to do then? Well, this is when states might want to step in and take a look at what they can do in their respective states to ensure that crime in their own states' communities can remain down, that they have the tools to fight crime. And there's no time like the present, right? Because we have 4 years now of border controls going forward, and we have 4 years now of deport those who are here illegally, insofar as a policy from this White House going forward. So we have the time now to turn to our state legislatures, petition our state governments to get a hold of issues that can ensure safety for citizens in their states and communities. And my guest today is Christopher Holton. He is a senior analyst and the director of state outreach for the very excellent Center for Security Policy. And he and one of his colleagues have penned this excellent commentary, this excellent piece, fact-based piece, about how states can do just that. How states can take a look at law and order and use law and order and their respective state constitutions and state laws and codes and everything to bring about policies that will ensure safety of citizens in their states and communities and keep out would-be terrorists and keep out would-be criminals. So, Chris, I want to thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. It is so great to have you here today.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I love the Washington Times, have for years.
Oh, that's great to know. So you, as a senior analyst for Center for Security Policy, have penned, in partnership with one of your colleagues, a commentary piece on how states can get involved in securing America's communities and so forth. But before we get into the details of that, I wanted to ask you, with Donald Trump coming into the White House, it seems like certain sanctuary states and jurisdictions run by Democrats are just buckling down even harder to rebel against any type of border control that keeps out illegals from their own communities. So how do you fight that if you happen to live in one of those states?
Wow, that's a good question. It boils down to all politics is local. And if a state or community adheres to those policies, the best place to start, in my opinion, is in your state legislature.
Yes.
State legislatures in many states have outlawed sanctuary policies within their states. And state legislatures have the power of the purse, and they can pass laws that say if a municipality insists on the sanctuary policy, they will lose a portion or all of their state funding for various projects. And so that's something that I think should be encouraged. If you're in a real blue state, it's tougher to do because, for instance, California is probably the state you're most talking about, I would imagine, because their governor has been very vocal about he's not going to disturb illegal aliens in his state. And there are many cities within California, and the state of California considers itself a sanctuary. So what do you do if you're in California?
Move, right?
Well, there was a time when people like Ronald Reagan were the governor of California. So I think there's hope for California, but it's going to have to be viewed as a long-term campaign to bring that state back to sanity.
It certainly seems like the recommendations that you outline in your piece, the timing is right. Americans are receptive to such ideas because crime, and especially crime from illegals, is really alarming to most Americans at this point. And I just wonder if you can detail some of your recommendations.
Well, look, the interest in these things always blossoms right after a terrible attack, like happened in my city on New Year's morning.
New Orleans.
But yes, ma'am. We've had through the center and through my colleague Stephen Gillette, who's a brilliant attorney and is our general counsel, we have developed many different legislative initiatives on the state level to combat both illegal alien crime as well as terrorism. And I should also say the tactics and techniques that organizations like Antifa have used. One of the things that Stephen has been particularly effective at is using state RICO racketeering statutes to bring existing crimes to be predicate crimes under those racketeering statutes, which in most states provides immediately harsher penalties and longer sentences, and in some cases a civil cause of action for victims of crime and terrorism to have a recourse to go after those who provide material support for these activities. And that's something that we're looking at very hard right now. There are a lot of NGOs that are involved in what I consider human smuggling and human trafficking, in bringing illegal aliens across our border and then distributing them across the country. I think those NGOs need to be held civilly and criminally liable for these actions. I think that's key. And it's something that, every state could do. It'll be harder in some states than others, but these NGOs have developed a cottage industry. And in the process of developing this cottage industry, where the Biden administration has given them money to conduct these operations, and many of these are religious charities that are doing this, unfortunately. But the Biden administration has given them money to do this, and then they distribute these folks around the country. But the bottom line is, from the other side of the border, it's the cartels who control that trade. So we are enabling the human smuggling operations and the human trafficking operations of these cartels. And it's very nefarious, and it needs to stop. That's one of the big ones right now.
I want to speak with more specifics about the NGOs, but before I ask you questions on that, I wonder, what kind of pushback have you received, and from what political camps have resisted the idea of expanding RICO to go after these players? Because I know that there is some discussions out there have been for years about using RICO for certain things that it was not intended to be used for during its creation. What kind of pushback do you receive on that?
We have had very little pushback. We are very selective about what predicate crimes we want to make under the RICO statutes on the state level. So if you look at some of the predicate crimes we've put under RICO in various states, they include terrorism, material support for terrorism, rioting, arson. And the thing is, if you look at how RICO works and racketeering laws work in various states, they require multiple offenses and a pattern of behavior. So this is not like, you commit one offense and they're going to slam you with a racketeering charge. This is for the organizations behind a lot of these activities who are conducting operations and committing crimes on a serial level. And so I'm sure that what you say is accurate about people not wanting to use RICO in ways that it was not originally intended for, but we haven't had much pushback at all for the types of crimes that we have enabled to be predicate crimes under RICO on the state level.
Okay, good deal. So now, speaking to the NGOs, can you put some names on those NGOs? Because I do know that there were certain NGOs that you refer to as religious organizations that have been instrumental in opening borders and enabling the migration of illegals into America, because they provide them under guise of Christian assistance. They provide them means of living here in America. Can you put some names on those NGOs so people are aware?
Sure. And I'm going to start, I'm a Catholic, so I'm going to start with my own religion. This is a multi-denominational thing, but Catholic Charities is one of the big ones. And then Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services is another. Those are two of the really big ones. There are Jewish organizations as well, and then there's some that aren't necessarily religious, but the big ones seem to be the ones that are, the religious tied ones. Catholic Charities is not the Catholic Church. A lot of people believe that that's the case, but it's a separate organization. So as a practicing Catholic, I don't have a problem with providing charity to people. The Catholic Church is outstanding at doing that. But the activities of some of these NGOs are really counterproductive, just completely counterproductive. And so I'm trying to come up with some of the names here.
Well, the Catholic Charities one is no surprise. That's the one I had in my mind when you actually said it as well.
I found my list. So, I mean, there are other organizations. And some of these organizations are kind of shadowy, and it seems like they were created specifically for the purpose of this Biden policy.
Really?
The International Organization for Migration, an International Rescue Committee, the Vera Institute of Justice, the Refugee and Immigrant Center for Education and Legal Services. The ACLU is involved in it. That's not a surprise.
Right.
The Young Center for Immigrant Children's Rights, the Asylum Seeker Advocacy Project, Act Blue, Border Angels, and Kids in Need of Defense. Those are some of the NGOs that are enabling this trade. And frankly, I think that the overall trade has enabled a human trafficking catastrophe. I mean, we've in the guise of trying to provide relief to people by allowing them in our country, what we have done is we have sentenced primarily young girls to a life of sex slavery and just horrible conditions. And look, this can't be refuted. There's no question that this is happening, and it is a humanitarian disaster, and it was created by the policies of our federal government.
Do you see with the incoming Trump administration and Tom Homan's narratives in particular, the promises to deport illegals, and the messages that are being sent right now around the world? Do you think between that and what you are saying could be some very beneficial state pieces of legislation, that the crime situation in America, the terror situation in America, the risks that we face right now in America from all that will quickly change? Or is it going to still be a slow process, you think?
Well, there's so many that have been brought in that I don't think it's going to, I think it's going to be a process of change for those that are already here. Now, I think that the flow across the border will quickly dry up. I think right before Trump comes in office, there'll be a mad dash to get across the line, so to speak, before Trump comes in. But I think Trump will institute policies and will work with Mexico in particular to institute policies that will slow down the flow across the border. And he will institute policies with our Border Patrol and other organizations to secure the border. But the thing is this, what Mr. Holman has said and what President-elect Trump, President Trump has said is that they're going to start with criminal aliens, because there are a lot of illegal aliens in this country who have been convicted of crimes. And they're going to start with deporting those. And I mean, that's just common sense. We need to get those people out of the country. They should never have been here in the first place. And they've committed crimes, and when their sentences are done, they need to be gone. They need to be out of this country. And then we need to have a secure border to make sure they can't get back in. I mean, this guy that lit the poor woman on fire in the New York subway, I mean, he was deported and came back in because it's nothing but a revolving door down there now.
Which sort of puts the highlights, and I just want to finish with this last question. So it sort of puts the highlights on what you wrote in your piece about how states can create legislation to help fight terror threats in America. The see something, say something law that went into effect, you say, in Mississippi and Tennessee, that sort of puts the that idea under the spotlight. How does that work in the pragmatic, though? Because it seems like some police stations may be overrun by people reporting things that seem suspicious, and in other instances it seems like people may be reluctant to report things that seem suspicious because of this lawsuit happy culture that could put them in the target.
Well, let me tell you, that particular law was conceived after a specific incident at the Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport years ago, in which a couple of imams showed up at the gate and made a demonstrative display of praying toward Mecca while waiting for the flight. And both of them were not overweight. They got on the flight and they asked for seatbelt extenders. And this was clearly a setup. They made all the other passengers very nervous. They made the flight attendants very nervous. And the airline was U.S. Air, which became U.S. Airways and is no longer in business, I don't think. But at any rate, the flight attendants consulted the captain of the aircraft, and the captain of an airliner has great authority in terms of who he can, what he can do with the occupants of his airplane. And he told the two, "You got to leave. You're making everybody else nervous." And it was clear that they were trying to make them nervous, because a day later or shortly thereafter, the Council on American Islamic Relations filed a lawsuit on behalf of these two imams against the airline. And this is the important part. It was against the airline. It was against the captain. It was against the flight attendants. And they filed suit against the passengers who complained.
Jeez.
And so, to inoculate people who have a legitimate concern, who report to a legitimate authority what they consider to be suspicious activity against frivolous lawsuits, this see something, say something legislation was created. And it's been passed in Tennessee and Mississippi. It was originally introduced in the state of New York, but it couldn't pass in New York, but it can pass in other places. So it's something, in New Orleans, if somebody had seen this guy driving around in his pickup truck with an ISIS flag flying from the trailer hitch, which is exactly what he was doing, and had reported it, they shouldn't have to hesitate, because, well, what if this guy sues me?
Exactly. Yeah, there was a big clue, the ISIS flag, yes?
Yeah, and you look, I haven't been down to Bourbon Street in 30 years, so I'm not familiar with what Bourbon Street looks like today, but I've seen video footage of it from very many angles, and, he was driving down Canal Street, which is a very large thoroughfare. It's the widest street in a central business district in the United States of America. And he's driving down Canal Street, flying this flag behind his truck. But it's, 3:15 in the morning on New Year's. So you can imagine in New Orleans that the majority of the people down there are either working in bars or drinking in bars.
Right.
And so people may not have noticed much.
But that doesn't take away from the strength of the law itself. See something, say something. And, you bring forward a lot of great ideas here, and I think the American people are sick and tired of living in fear from open borders and Democrat-controlled enclaves. So I do hope that some of these policies are put into effect. I want to thank you so much for the work that you do at Center for Security Policy. It's a great organization. And thank you, Chris, for being on Bold and Blunt. It was great chatting with you.
Thank you so much for having me. Anytime.
And that's another Bold and Blunt. Remember, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at Real Life Network, at WashingtonTimes.com, and of course, wherever podcasts are available. Tune in next time. In the meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.
Marketing is hard. But I'll tell you a little secret. It doesn't have to be. Let me point something out. You're listening to a podcast right now, and it's great. You love the host. You seek it out and download it. You listen to it while driving, working out, cooking, even going to the bathroom. Podcasts are a pretty close companion. And this is a podcast ad. Did I get your attention? You can reach great listeners like yourself with podcast advertising from Libsyn Ads. Choose from hundreds of top podcasts offering host endorsements, or run a pre-produced ad like this one across thousands of shows to reach your target audience and their favorite podcasts with Libsyn Ads. Go to libsynads.com, that's LIBSYN, ads.com today.